should tell you this, that a few weeks ago, Jane was up at Brescia College for a meeting about food and agriculture and also the influence of women in those fields. And she's been there before and done it, but this time she came home later in the evening and she said, Glenn, I got somebody you've got to talk to on Food Bites. And I said, who is it? She says, it was this woman from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and she's just so full of ideas, and she informs so much of the thinking that night of what people were going through. So I said, sure, I'll do that. So she gave me the contact information, and I phoned Cathy Lennon, who was kind enough to be willing to come and humor me with her knowledge and the things that she could do, and that's great. But Cathy, I wanted to play something for you because I know you're with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I've also written down here that you've worked with the Sheep Farmers of Ontario, Farm Credit Canada. You're also processing vegetable growers. You worked with them as well. And do you know Rocco Rossi?
I do, because I sit on the Ontario Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors with
Exactly. Rocco and I are old friends. A long time ago, we worked together in Ottawa, and we follow one another on Facebook a lot. But anyway, you are so involved in so many different things, and it's great. But one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is this. Have a look at this. Just humor me for a minute. Let's see if I get it right.
Her hands are strong but gentle. She knows what it takes to get the job done. A risk taker and master of multitasking, she raises her children while putting food on her table and ours. She is a farmer. She has been feeding Ontario for generations. Without her and her many hands, none of us would be here. Kudos to her and the many women like her, the unsung heroes who work tirelessly to feed our growing world.
So other than the voice that was on that commercial, which is mine, they'd asked me to narrate it. It was with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture and also Fields to Forks. But I remember when I did it just how much I had learned about women being involved in agriculture. And it was just so fascinating. And we were working with Brescia at the time, and it was all really great. But I wondered, I'm not going to ask your impression of that ad, but I would like to know if you can give us a bit of a background. I think, is it 38,000 families that the Ontario Federation of Agriculture represents? Is that correct?
That's right. 38,000 farm families across the province of Ontario.
That's correct. And what proportion of those would women farmers make up?
Well, one of the things that we often like to say at the OFA is just about every farm family has a woman somewhere, whether it's a mother or a spouse or a business partner or a daughter. They're involved in nearly every farm operation across the province. Stats Canada will tell you that the reports in the 2021 would report that about 31% of Canadian farms are currently operated primarily by women, and that is a growing statistic. So just by a little, I think it was 30% in the previous report and 31 in this most recent one. So
yeah, I mean, it's there and it's a reality, but you don't tend to think about it so much. You just kind of put farmers in a generic thing, and it's often people think of male farmers, but I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the female farmers in the last couple of years, and the work is kind of really hard, right? And there's also a kind of a growing, I would say, insecurity within them that especially after the pandemic, things seem to change so much. But, they're not quite sure where their industry is going and where small and medium-sized farms will fit in all of that. I'm sure that you talk about that a lot with various individuals, but how has it changed since the pandemic from what it was before?
So I think one of the bright lights from the pandemic, if I can say there were a few, is that there have been a tremendous amount of opportunities for people to get more involved in community activities, ag politics, organizations through tools like what we're using here today. We have been able to engage farmers and farm women from all across the province. We are very fortunate. I live in Rockwood, close to the city of Guelph. And so a lot of agricultural networking opportunities and events and educational opportunities have kind of been in my neighborhood. So I've had really access to those sorts of things. But I think we have seen since the pandemic a real opportunity for individuals from Eastern Ontario, Northern Ontario, even the southwest corners of the province, to be able to get more involved and be at the table and be decision makers. And I think that's really exciting and something good that's come from the pandemic.
What about the economic side of it, though? How has that been since the pandemic? Has it opened up more? Is it diversified? Is it lessened? How's that going?
I would say we learned a lot during the pandemic about the food system. And one thing that we're really proud of is that the food system, it bent, but it didn't break. And a lot of farmers and farm businesses had to find new ways to market and get their products out into the hands of consumers. So whether that was taking more advantage of sales from home or farm gate sales or farmers markets, there was a significant period of time that a lot of restaurants were closed. So farmers that had built a business on delivering local meat products or honey or fresh vegetables to local restaurants to be promoted and served had to sort of find different ways to package and get food out into the community in different ways. So I think we have seen some businesses grow tremendously. A lot of consumers actually started looking more for local product. They had a new increased awareness of local food, local economies, supporting your neighbor during the pandemic than they might have had before. So some businesses grew and some certainly suffered. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So back in 2019, you were made general manager of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. But what was so great about that was you were the first woman to have taken on that role. And this is from CBC in 2019. But, how was that for you prior to that? Kind of getting to that level. Did you feel that this was something you were really ready for? Given all the things that were going on in the global economy too. But I just wondered how that felt being the first female head of Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and how was that received overall?
Yeah, so I would say this is actually one of the things that I talked about at Brescia a couple of weeks ago was there is a place for women and young people in agriculture. There's all kinds of opportunities, and it doesn't matter if you are interested in science or human resources or technology, marketing, management, finance. There is an opportunity. This industry is very exciting. It's growing. It's always going to be needed. And there is an opportunity for the next generation to get involved. And I think when I was growing up, working in agriculture, agribusiness was never on my radar, actually. I was attending the University of Waterloo, and I had every intentions of going on to become a lawyer. But I was looking for a co-op job, and an agricultural organization was looking for someone to fill it. And so I lucked out at the Agricultural Adaptation Council in a role. And I found that it actually was very welcoming. So lots of opportunities, ask questions. There is nothing farmers like more than to tell you about their business and what they do and how they do it and why they do it. And that doesn't matter whether they're growing Brussels sprouts or raising dairy cows. They almost all want to invite you to their farm and show you what they're doing and how they're doing it, and they welcome questions and new people. So as a young woman, in my early 20s and entering into an agricultural career, I found it very welcoming, and certainly have always found that as I stepped through a number of roles and found myself at the OFA. I guess I was the first female general manager at the Ontario Processing Vegetable Growers as well, and I guess that's important, but I never really felt it myself to be particularly, special or unusual.
But to other women, that would have been. Like, I think that I met some women farmers in Brescia last year at another event that was there. And I remember just how people gathered around them, students from Brescia, especially female students, who saw in these people and in somebody like you pathfinders. So yes, there is a willingness and acceptance for those kind of things, but it's sometimes hard to get up there and doing it. And it seems to me that you have done that. But within agriculture, it's not just farming, is it? Like there's things like research, networking, communication, just education, so many different aspects of it. So for women, it's actually quite a diverse range of things that they could get involved in, which would still be helping the food system, still be helping to feed people, still be part of the economy. But it's not just about getting out on your farm and doing so. There's lots of different opportunities. Am I correct there? Even through universities, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always, I've told every young person I think I've ever met, you tell me what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and I will help you figure out a career path to it. There's lots of innovation in science and technology. If computers or automation are your thing, I've seen and looked at lots of opportunities in the greenhouse industry, for instance, where they're looking at ways to reduce labor requirements and automate things like picking cucumbers or picking mushrooms. And HR, there's lots of people that are looking at recruiting and headhunting and training and providing orientation to board members and leaders and new staff in organizations. There's a role for teaching. There's a tremendous amount of energy put into supporting elementary and even high schools in teaching kids about food and food literacy and nutrition and career opportunities. I spent 10 years of my life at Farm Credit Canada in banking. So if your passion is numbers or accounting and finance and business planning, there's a tremendous need there. There's really nothing that doesn't touch the ag sector. Lawyers, everybody's always looking for, agricultural lawyers and specialists and people involved in marketing and creating labels and all sorts of things.
Yeah. So you are a pioneer, you are a groundbreaker, right? I do know that Jane came back, and Jane's been around a lot. She's worked a lot in Africa, other parts of the world. Oh, wow. She's been at the food bank for 38 years. She's been married to me for 25, which has not been easy, I'm sure. But the point is, she came away really impressed from listening to you, and I think it was from the breadth of your experience, right? So you're not somebody who's just gone out there and maybe you're working on one particular operation, but you've been around in the industry. You understand it and the opportunities. And she said she came away with the feeling that there are more opportunities out there than perhaps women realize. Because they're maybe not hearing enough about it. So I think somebody like you comes along and suddenly they go, oh, geez, I hadn't thought of that area or things like that before. But it seems to me that's a special responsibility. So although you might not feel it's all that big a deal, I know that you're aware of the fact that for others, you're kind of a link to them, a channel for them into that broader field of agriculture. And I presume that's pretty sweet for you to be able to inspire others to move in that direction. Or do I have that wrong?
No, it is touching. I had some really great feedback from the folks that I met, immediately after speaking at Brescia College. And one of the things I wanted to do, I wasn't sure who the audience would be there, but I stood at the little podium and looked at the folks that were there. I could see that there were some young women that were attending Brescia College or connected to the university somehow. And I was really hoping that I would inspire one or two or a half a dozen of them to say, hey, I had thought of this as a career path, but now I'm interested in digging in and finding a little bit more about food. One of the things I love about the sector is there is no one that you will ever meet that is not interested in talking about food, whether it's whether you're talking about wine and wine regions, or the fact that Southwestern Ontario, where we grow processing tomatoes, it's on the same parallel as California and some of the best tomato producing regions in Europe. And people don't know those things. And, I know the only Brussels sprouts farmer in Canada, and that's pretty cool. And people are interested in knowing about where their food comes from and how farmers raise their crops and their vegetables and their livestock. And so it's always a good cocktail party discussion, no matter where I am.
Can I tell you a story? It's a personal one, but when the COVID first happened, we were visited by city officials, and they said, look, you've got to stay open. We need you. All the agencies are depending on you, because many of them had to either shut down or really limit their operations. So we had to consider how we were going to operate moving forward. And, it was a very challenging but wonderful time. The community came through in ways we had just never envisioned before, and it was pretty amazing. But food banks often get by on food drives. Now, they're not as essential as they used to be, but we came into our big spring drive, food drive, which is the biggest of the year. Bags would normally go into the Free Press, the newspaper. The fire department was involved, police, it's a big deal. It's our big drive, and but you couldn't do that. Right, it was kind of impossible. So I was up at Brescia speaking to a class, and a couple of students came up afterwards and said, could we help you with that? So I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, why don't you have a virtual food drive? Right. And I said, oh, okay. How would that work? Well, they weren't quite sure. So they went away and they came back to me a week later, and we just had them design it all. We resourced them. We did all the things that they needed. And we got way more from that food drive than we had elsewhere, because normally it depended a lot more on traditional media and other things in the past. They opened up all sorts of new channels for us, but I talked to them both just a few weeks ago, and that understanding for them that actually people are way more into food than you realize. Whether they grow their own or whatever it is, they really want fresh food for the kids, their interest in nutrition, all that kind of stuff. And it was the food drive, I think, that really helped them to understand that a community was ready to embrace their leadership that they showed there. And we as a food bank were totally willing to embrace the kind of expertise they brought on the technology side of things. And it was kind of a marriage made in heaven at that particular time. But it has been my sense that, most of us as food bank directors, we've been around a long time, 38 years, as I said. We don't see us as the answer to anything that way. We're there for emergency needs. On the other hand, it really is true that the public gathered around that. Organizations did, even businesses. They gathered around food banks as a way to help other people. And I think they ended up organizing, galvanizing, networking in ways that they hadn't done before. In other words, they were all in. They were trying to help their fellow citizens with what they needed. And I think even for them, there was this growing awareness that our community is really ready for this. But in coming into it, they also learned that the community is really ready for perishable food. Right? They're interested in sustainability. So it became quite nuanced the more we got into it. But I would have to think that what you said there is really true. I think the public, citizens, right, even organizations within communities are far more ready for something of a evolution or revolution this way than we realized. And I think COVID helped to open up the eyes of many towards that. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. We really saw for the first time in, our generations during COVID that people were recognizing what it was like to go to the grocery store, and potentially what they were looking for was not there. We started to see things were not always going to be immediately available to us, not just food, right? So I might have went to the grocery store and there was no flour, or I had to buy it in a 100-pound bag and make a whole lot of cinnamon buns, which I sure did during COVID. But people started to understand things about self-sufficiency and food security, and that was a realization at the consumer level and at the government level. For instance, whether it was, masks. For a while, they were not easy to get, or whether it was vaccines, and countries were beginning to look after their own people first, and so we couldn't just assume if you don't produce it in your own country, it will be readily available to you when you need it. Yeah. So we started to talk about that around our board tables as well, about food. And this was a prime time to raise, consumer awareness about the importance of long-term food security. Are we going to have enough food to feed Ontarians, Canadians, and the world long-term? The day may come when California has to look after themselves and we don't have immediate and easy year-long access to fruit and vegetables shipped to Canada from other countries. So we started to really try to focus on helping consumers understand how does land play into that. So we're looking at all communities all across the province of Ontario, whether it's London or Hamilton or Windsor or Ottawa. There is pressure to bring more housing to the market. Housing is important, and so is food production. And so we need to find a way to do both. And we feel really strongly that the opportunity is to build within and up within existing urban boundaries and protect that incredibly valuable resource for long-term food production. And so one of the things we started telling people is, what can you grow on 319 acres of land? So it's hard for the average person to think about what is 319 acres. So I say, well, have you ever pulled into the parking lot of Walt Disney World, Magic Kingdom? I think it's 30,000 cars can be parked at 319 acres. But 319 acres also produces 12.6 million pounds of carrots every single year. It produces 1.2 million bottles of wine every single year. And so all of the products that we produce and enjoy here at home in Ontario and supply to the world, we need to make sure that we have the precious resource of land available long term. And the decisions that we make today really matter the most in 50 or 80 or 100 years. It's long-term thinking that's important here to make sure that we have food security for the future.
There's so much I want to talk to you about, Cathy. As a food bank, we've been trying to tell our community, look at food insecurity is growing. We're now helping 6,000 families a month, right? We're helping 25 other agencies. Nobody ever thought we would be in this position, but we are. And the further we go along, even as the economic situation in Canada, I was at a meeting lately when I asked these business leaders, what has been Canada's wealthiest year? And they thought it was maybe in the early 60s or in the mid 90s, but it was 2019. That was the first time our gross domestic product exceeded $2 trillion, right? And so obviously there's money being made, there's massive economic things going on. And yet at the same time as that is growing and getting stronger, so is homelessness, so is the inability to afford accommodation, so is food insecurity. So obviously there's not a strong link between public policy, especially economic policy, and what's going on here. And I think my worry is that as a food bank, we're not really the right group to be doing that, for sure, for one thing. But the other thing is when you mention food security and that a community needs to provide for itself, people automatically start thinking of a greenhouse or growing a garden in their backyard, raised bed, little container, whatever it is that they start to go. And all that stuff is so important because it raises the consciousness of the community, right? It's so important. But economically, it won't do it. Right? All that can happen, and yet at the same time, hungry families can still keep getting greater and greater. It really is the economy that matters. And how do we get industrial kind of stuff going on, right? Farming, agriculture, all of those different things. How can we take a community like London that struggled so much in recent years, and how can we build that agriculture food sector with London, with the growers around it? I know you're from Guelph. Guelph has transacted many different innovations that they have done around food in the community. But what would you say to communities like London? I know that you would feel the same way, but you would say, look outside of you. Look around you and see what's there. But what would they do? What would they have to do as a community to make themselves food secure by working with the growers, producers, and processors around them?
That is such a huge question.
Yeah.
So I think, but there's some small things, and one of the things that we think is really tangible to people is to support local and choose local. So whether you go to the grocery store or your farmer's market or buy directly from a farmer, every time you spend $1 at home on someone that is growing that food in your community, that money's staying in your community, right? So it was grown here. and it was, cooked here, prepared here, eating at local restaurants. You can keep that money and those resources in your community, which is incredibly important. I think too, you have some incredible examples in London. We actually hold up your city as a very near and dear success story in the agri-food sector. You've got a lot of companies that have chosen London as home, right? So I used to, as you mentioned, I worked at Ontario Processing Vegetable Growers for a couple of years. For anybody who doesn't know, what does that mean? It's anything that is pickled, canned, or frozen. It means it's available year round, right? So, people think about growing vegetables and produce as something that is available, just during the prime season in Canada, right? So May is your earliest crops of asparagus through to October when you're getting the ends of your apples. But we have an industry here, it's very, very special, that ensures that that fresh Ontario grown product can be available year round. And it's quite affordable, actually. So looking for those local labels, but that are pickled, canned, or frozen actually can make a really big difference. And there's some companies, as I mentioned, in your neighborhood, like Dr. Oetker's comes to mind, creating a significant number of pizzas right there in London, and sourcing local product as much as they can to ensure that that business is there. And you've got some innovation centers there as well that are really trying to incubate small businesses at the Western Fairgrounds, yes, the Western Fairgrounds. And supporting, oftentimes it's actually women and small businesses. They are helping to incubate and grow and sort of help them commercialize some really successful products and get them out there and get them off their feet and highly successful. So you're doing some really great things already.
But we need more, right? It's like around London, all these homes are being built, but homelessness is growing. Yeah. Accommodation costs are so I think that's exactly true, and we've been to a number of those operations and looked at them even for this show, and it's been really great. But the overall food insecurity continues to grow. And so we need more of those kind of things to do that. And at some point, it would be good to talk with you about what does the city need to do to accommodate those new kind of innovations that are going on, or even some of the old innovations. When I told you about that white paper earlier, we talked to local farmers who said, look, we just don't have the opportunities of bringing our food into London to sell it. There's just, due to bylaws or other things, whatever, there's all these limitations. And so we have to end up shipping it to someplace else. And they would rather bring it into London. I really would like to talk to you at some point, because I presume every city has got its own unique challenges that way, and that holds things back. But we need to be able to tell our city leaders, this is what you need. This is what Guelph is doing, or this is what London's doing. We need more. But is it your sense that cities are getting that message? And I'm talking here about the political leadership, the bureaucratic leadership in cities.
I think that over the last year, there has been a sort of a tremendous amount of interest. Have we come up with the solutions? I don't think we have, but there is an increased awareness about the importance of the social infrastructure that is required to support individuals and families, in cities and across the province, and in small towns for that matter. It means we need affordable, accessible housing. It means we need, education and hospitals and walk-in clinics and schools and everything that goes with it that provides support to our communities and access to mental health and all those sorts of things to sort of pick people up and get them going in a direction that can be sustainable and provide them with long-term wellness. I don't think there is any answers, but there's a lot of small solutions, I think, that are becoming more apparent all the time.
Yeah, if you grant us a second show, I'd really like to talk about that. We need to, as citizens, soften up our cities to be more aware that this is where we're at. We want to see these things, but also we have local growers and producers and innovators, not just outside the city, but within the city.
The other thing that is sort of on the radar, but it's another big conversation sort of separate from this too, is looking at food waste and figuring out ways from the farm all the way through to the processing sector to make sure that